Kui is a musical heritage, a story with a deep meaning. The Kui Zhez kiik. Ykylas Dukenuly. Legends in music. The glare from the white snow hurt his eyes like sharp needles. His swollen feet were tired from fatigue, refusing to go on any further. The elderly man took a few more steps and then fell to the ground, pressing his back against the dry trunk of the tree. His arms and legs were numb with cold, and he was in unbearable pain. The old Kuishi Aman looked in front of him, and this terrible picture of a raging storm stood before him again and again. But when the snowstorm wall suddenly collapsed, spinning him in a deadly dance, he left his neighboring aul on a beautiful sunny day. Straddling his sturdy stallion, he said goodbye to his relatives who so warmly said farewell to him, having collected jerky meat, crispy cakes, and bottles of kumis for the journey. Aman thought he would return home before dark, but now here he sits, under a tree, barely alive, having miraculously escaped. The old man rubbed his white hands and breathed on them, but they didn't even turn pink. He just barely removed an icy piece of flat bread from his bag. Aman bit at the edge and chewed it slowly. The Oxacal knew this way well. The village was not far away, and he was able to reach it. The main thing is not to let fatigue have an advantage on him. He had to go and keep going, otherwise he would be killed by the frost. He couldn't even move. His eyes were closed. Memories flashed through his mind. At once he was riding across the steppe, admiring the sparkling snow, and how suddenly it became very cold. The Kuishi became sleepy. The sweet drowsiness began to lull him. It became very warm, and he sank into a deep sleep that could last forever and take him away from this world. Suddenly, Aman saw the slow-moving spirits of his ancestors, the sacred Aruas. One of them had a staff by which he measured his steps. They went to him. "Hey," a voice said. "Get up, Aman, get up." "Have you come for me?" he asked the spirits. "No," they answered. "Your time has not come yet. Wake up, Aman, wake up." The Aruas turned around and, also lining up in a chain, began to slowly leave. The old man shuddered, rubbing his face with his hands, and a veil fell down from his eyes. His thoughts cleared. Aman looked around. It was going to get dark soon, and so he had to keep going. He had to go, at whatever the cost. Aman tried to get up, but nothing happened. He seemed to be stuck to the ground. The Kuishi was powerless. Suddenly he saw a dark point. It moved slowly. He understood that it was a man. Aman screamed, but his voice sounded like a muddy groan. The old man began to wave his hands, and he opened his silent mouth. It seemed to him that the figure began to move away from him. He was not noticed. Then he took out his kobus from his bag in some unknown impulse. The bow touched the strings, and the shrilly sound broke through the dead silence in the plain. The man stopped, turned around, and headed towards the crying voice of the kobus. Zhez kiik. It was frosty, and the lonely snowflakes were still dancing in the air. They were then torn off from the snow cover by a recently debrived snowstorm. The strong legs of the horse were tied up in the snow. The driver had to travel very slowly and carefully, making his way through the thick spruce wilds. He breathed in the icy air, filled with the smell of pine needles and woody bark. In this seemingly lifeless silence, with his sharp eyes of the experienced hunter, he saw and heard many inhabitants who hastily hid in their inconspicuous burrows and nests. Here among the mountains, his soul was filled with that serenity and joy that he had not heard in his house for many years. He went on a hunt alone and returned to his empty house where no one was expecting him. It was an amazingly sunny day, and snow, like the scattered fine rocks of crystals, covered the whole valley, lying between the two mountain ridges. The fir wood ended in a steep slope, and the Ykylas, after leaving it, saw barely noticeable little gray spots far below, near the narrow river. Anyone else could have missed them altogether, but not him. The hunter immediately determined that this was a small herd of saigak, stopped for a short rest. He knew perfectly well that these animals change their yellowish-red coloration to grayish-white in the cold season, and are covered with thick, dense wool. Now he needed to approach them cautiously and at a distance of an arrow shot. He will go along the slope, hiding in the fir trees in the dense thickets of bushes. Ykylas knew these places very well, and his horse would go so that no dry branch would crack under his hooves. Approaching close enough, the hunter silently put the bow up and prepared for his shot. He aimed at the largest adult male, with the large, straight, yellowish-white horns looking into the sky. Another movement, and, cutting through the thick, frosty air, the arrow would pierce him in his large neck, directly into the pulsating artery. The hunter pulled the bowstring, but suddenly his horse moved sharply. Ykylas reeled off. Releasing the arrow, it flew past its target. Fast and frisky hares jumped out of the snowdrift, frightening the horse and disappearing into the bushes. The herd, led by its strong leader, ran away quickly, farther and farther away from the hunter, until they disappeared completely out of his sight. Ykylas was surprised that near the river there was one saigak of an amazing bright copper color. Well, God has been merciful to me today. I will not be left without a catch. Although my arrow flew by, the hunter thought. This saigak could not escape, either because of illness or because of trauma. He mounted the horse and quickly rushed down the slope. The saigak stood up and took several steps, and then again fell to the ground, unable to go on. The hunter jumped down from his horse, and taking his sharp knife, he headed towards the animal. Ykylas came closer, and was even more surprised at the beautiful color. not at all suitable for this time of year. For some reason, it did not lose its color like everyone else. It was a female, hornless and weak. A reddish-yellow spot on the white snow seemed to be a bright blazing fire. A deep wound in the thigh caused severe pain to the animal. The animal raised her head, and the hunter saw her eyes, wet and huge, with yellowish veins. Contained in those eyes were everything: pain, fear, and hope. Ykylas looked into the eyes of the Saigak as he was enchanted. It seemed to him that he had already seen them. And suddenly a fair was appearing in front of him, and it was real, noisy, bustling, and crowded. There he first saw her, and these bright, beautiful big eyes with yellowish veins. She stood out among all the girls due to her beauty. The two older brothers were next to her, with an important kind of walking. At noon, the large, noisy crowd gathered and looked at the Jigits to find out who would win in the competition called Jambiatu, who would be the most accurate and swift-handed. The men approached one by one, and they shot an arrow, pulling the bowstring back and hoping to knock down a silver disc suspended on a thin rope of horsehair. Disappointed, they retracted to the side. None could hit the target. Ykylas watched the match attentively and decided to compete as well. The crowd began to buzz. Ykylas took the bow in his hands, examined it, and with a quick movement he pulled the string back and let it go. Everyone waited in anticipation. The dot flashed and disappeared. This arrow instantly took off the silver disc and flung it to the ground. People jumped, and they shouted joyfully and praised Ykylas for the unprecedented accuracy. They handed him the award, a beautiful silk handkerchief. Ykylas took the outstretched handkerchief and smiled as he looked around at the people. They were excited and rejoicing. Suddenly he saw again those big, mocking eyes. His heart beat madly. Making his way through the crowd with difficulty, he approached the beautiful girl and handed her the handkerchief. The tender girl's cheeks were flushed, and she laughed as clear as a bell. Then she covered her face with her palm. The brothers narrowed their eyes and frowned in displeasure. They exchanged glances among themselves, but did not dare to refuse the winner. They let their sister take the gift. The girl thanked the Jigit and accepted an outstretched silk handkerchief. Ykylas fell in love with the beautiful Aizire passionately. She lived near the neighboring Aul, and sometimes he would walk with her among the steppe flowers, and happiness like a cloud covered him and made him drunk. Once Aizire said in a sad voice that in 20 days one noble Jigit would come to her father, and she would be asked in marriage. Ykylas assured the girl that he would be the first to send his matchmakers to the house of her father. The brothers knew about Ykylas' love for their sister and decided by all means to stop him. They were counting on getting a large dowry for their sister. They were ready to do anything to take it away from this hunter. They stole from Aizire the handkerchief given by the Jigit. They talked and sent their servant to his house. The servant, as he was told, said that Aizire had sent him. The servant asked him not to be in a hurry, because she went with her father to visit his uncle. She will not return soon, and so that he does not miss her, she has given him the handkerchief. Ykylas was uneasy in his mind. A week passed, but there was no news from the beloved. He then decided not to wait any longer, and jumping on his horse, he rushed to the next Aul at full speed. When Ykylas arrived at the home, he saw that there was no one there. He looked around and noticed an old woman sitting, looking at the wool. He rushed to her with questions. When would Aizire return from her uncle's house? The old woman stared at him in surprise. Shaking her head, she replied, "What are you saying, son? She will not come to her father's house anymore. Our beauty has found a rich fiancé, and he has taken her to his place." This grieved Ykylas to his very heart. These words pierced his heart with a sharp pain, and mist appeared in his eyes. He stood in a daze and could not make a single step. Then, through the dull veil of his eyes, he saw the two brothers who were walking towards the house, but they noticed him and stopped. The hunter saw a grin on their faces, and then he guessed everything. Ykylas carried on an attack against them. He beat them desperately. Such anger and strength were inside of him that he could have killed them if people had not run and dragged him away. A lot of time has passed since then, and only the silk handkerchief that he cherished all of his life remained from his beloved. And in these open, shining, frightened eyes of the Saiga, he saw the sad events of his life, and he sat next to it on the ground. He bowed his head, and salty tears began to roll down the frozen cheeks of the hunter. "Do not be afraid of me," Ykylas said softly, stroking the bright copper wool. "I will not harm you, beautiful animal. I will stay with you until I cure your wounds, and you will return again to your herd." The hunter was near the Saiga for several days. He took care of the wound, processed the herbal decoction, and applied healing moss. At last the wound was tightened, and the animal gained its strength. Ykylas was watching the red copper point for a long time, until it disappeared into the black-gray stones of the mountain range. Ykylas Dukenuly is one of the founders of the Kobus school. He continued in the path of the legendary Kurkut Ata. In his words we find widely known legends and tales, such kuis as Zhez kiik and Kambar, as well as Kazan and Shinirao. Thanks to many of his followers, the art of the Kobus has reached our days, which is continuing to develop and continues to conquer its listeners with its sound.